Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Remarks by President Donald Trump about acquiring Greenland as well as the tariffs have reignited debate over whether they represent a mere provocation or a deeper strategic ambition. As Arctic geopolitics intensify, questions are growing about sovereignty, security, and great power competition in High North. Joining us today on TVP World to examine what's really at stake is Professor Klaus Dodds, Interim Dean for Faculty of Science and Technology at Middlesex University, an expert on geopolitics and polar regions. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you.
So let's kick things off with the most recent development. Trump has announced tariffs for countries that seems to be getting its way in his ambition of acquiring Greenland. It is fair to say at this point that these ambitions are very real and Trump does indeed wants to acquire the island.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, what you're seeing is effectively blunt force geopolitics. So President Trump was very clear, and he has been actually over the last 12 months, that he thinks the acquisition of Greenland is integral to what is now called Western Hemispheric dominance. But in the recent past, you've also heard the president talk about national security planning.
All right. We've been speaking to people in the United States as well, and even people who are familiar with the Republicans' way of thinking find it questionable because this policy, even within the party, doesn't seem as popular. There is theory being floated around that this is also perhaps a sort of a geopolitical power play or a distraction of sorts. Do you think that there are any validity to these theories, or do you think at this point it is very clear he does intend to annex the island?
I think, to be perfectly candid, the underpinning rationale for the acquisition of Greenland is several-fold. First of all, and I've said this several times now, I genuinely think there's an element of ego politics rather than geopolitics. President Trump wants to make America great again, and one of the ways he thinks America becomes great again is America becomes larger. Greenland is 3 times larger than the state of Texas. Secondly, there is a minerals agenda. Greenland has a mineral potential. Donald Trump is obsessed with breaking China's stranglehold on rare earths and critical minerals. So there's an element of geoeconomics, if you like. Thirdly, Donald Trump wants to keep Greenland free from Chinese and Russian interference. And fourthly, as I said a moment ago, it is absolutely linked to this sense that in order to have Western Hemispheric dominance, the United States needs to take over the defense of Greenland because small states like Denmark cannot be trusted.
Right. Speaking of China and Russian dominance in Greenland, there has been a little bit of back and forth between the U.S. administration and the Denmark. The Greenland side saying that perhaps the threat of China and Russia's presence within Greenland is a little bit overrepresented or overstated by the U.S. administration, while the U.S. is very adamant on saying that, well, there's boats all over the place. What's the actual situation on the ground there?
So the actual situation on the ground, I'm afraid, departs radically from the way in which President Trump has characterized it. Russia and China do collaborate with one another, and they have done for at least a decade in various ways. But actually, when you think about where Russia and China are collaborating in terms of joint maritime aerial patrols, it's all off the coastline of Alaska. It's not off the coastline of Greenland. So I think China is a concern for the United States in the sense that China is now a great polar power. But actually, truthfully, the Kingdom of Denmark has largely turned away from China. So this idea that China's on the verge of taking over Greenland is just doesn't bear scrutiny.
Do you think this could actually backfire somehow, seeing we've seen the example of Canada, whereas Carney, before the election, calls China one of the biggest threats to Canada, but after butting heads with the U.S. administration, has now went to China to reestablish ties, seemingly to counter the American power. Do you think a similar situation might take place in Greenland?
I think something extraordinary is happening in Greenland. Donald Trump appears to have achieved several things simultaneously. First of all, Canada turning towards China and others because it recognizes the United States as no longer a reliable security, let alone trading partner. Secondly, the future of NATO appears to be put under some stress and strain. Indeed, it's existential if the United States engages in direct action against Greenland. And thirdly, who does all of this benefit in terms of European North American schism and fracture? President Putin. It's quite an extraordinary place to be.
And speaking of that fracture, coming back to the tariffs, we're looking at these 8 countries being tariffs are all the countries that have sent troops to Greenland. And one of the things that we have noticed is that it's mostly Western Europe countries with no mentions of Central Eastern Europe. Do you think that this has already caused a division within the European countries?
Yes, I mean, in essence, I'm sorry to be, in a sense, to labour the point, but actually what this has achieved is the very thing that President Putin would be enormously pleased with, which is actually a fracture within the NATO security alliance. And the very countries that are having tariffs imposed upon them, or the threat of, in the aftermath of this statement of solidarity with the Kingdom of Denmark, are some of the countries that came to the United States' assistance when the United States needed allies more than ever, and that was in the immediate aftermath of the September 2001 attacks.
And what do you think is the geopolitical calculus of the CE countries for not getting involved in this, be it spat, be it a kind of rift between the Western Europe over Greenland with the United States?
Well, I think, first of all, I distinguish between public and private support. So I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever Central and Eastern European countries are utterly horrified what they're seeing. Because if you think about the logic that Donald Trump is applying to the Kingdom of Denmark, it goes along the lines of like this. Small country with a large territory doesn't appear capable of defending itself, so the United States has to step in, threaten it with annexation in order to secure its national security. Think about how that then plays out, for example, with President Putin and Ukraine on the one hand, and President Xi and Taiwan on the other. This is an extraordinary and dangerous precedent that is on the verge of being set.
Right. Speaking of the smaller country, how do Denmark and Greenland's own government view such statements, especially with the tariffs now coming in strong?
I think if I had one word to sum it all up, it would be betrayal. Utter betrayal. In 1951, Denmark and the United States signed a defense agreement which effectively gave the United States carte blanche to do whatever they needed to do to secure not only Greenland, but also North American hemispheric defense. Because in those days, all the concern was over long-range Soviet bombers. Greenland was the place to be to potentially intercept, monitor any attack that might come from the Soviet Union, because the Arctic Ocean was the closest bit, if you like, between the Soviet Union and North America. Fast forward to 2001, Denmark answered the call when the United States invoked Article 5 of the NATO treaty. Fast forward another 20 plus years, we are where we are. An absolute sense of betrayal that the territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark is threatened repeatedly with blatant violation by the United States. Betrayal.
Right. There's this idea of thinking that the Greenland was under-defended, and after these different countries have now sent troops to be stationed in Greenland. Some people are attributing it to the U.S. administration as some sort of like brilliant 4D chess play in the sense that they actually get the Europeans to defend Greenland finally. Do you think that there is any validity to that line of thinking, or is it much of a 2 + 2 = 5 situation?
I think, to be blunt, that there may be a degree of sophistication being applied here, which is misplaced. Garry Kasparov, the former great chess player, is a very, very prescient analyst of the Trump administration. I don't think he would, for example, accredit some great chess-like strategizing here. I said earlier, this is an example of blunt force geopolitics. This is a president using the levers of power to try and intimidate and coerce a smaller ally. And actually what you're seeing here is, in a sense, threats, bluster, and then the application of something that the Trump administration has used a great deal of, which is tariff and trade weaponization to try and get their way. In the end, the dilemma President Trump has is whether he's able to de-escalate and step down, or, as your clips showed earlier, whether Congress in particular is going to act against what looks to me like executive overreach.
Right. If Trump were to pursue a line of a de-escalation, is there at this point any sort of off-ramp for him to say, oh, well, okay, let's just not do this anymore?
So I think there are two elements to it. One we've seen already, which is Denmark has committed to spend billions more euros in terms of Greenlandic defence. So actually, if President Trump was looking for a win, he already has it. Through 12 months of public statements and sometimes, frankly, quite menacing announcements, he's actually achieved what he wants, which is European states to do more heavy lifting when it comes to security. So you could say, okay, job done. The other element, and this is where Ukraine comes back into the picture, is you could imagine a new security, energy, resource agreement being signed between the Kingdom of Denmark and the United States, which, amongst other things, commits the Kingdom of Denmark to making sure that, for example, no Chinese company or entity will ever be allowed to do business on the island. That might, for example, provide another off-ramp without leading to some kind of humiliating climb down. But that's going to be hard, given how often President Trump has said, we want Greenland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem like he's been gassing this thing up more and more, making it harder and harder to ramp off. And at this point, we're looking at a destabilization of Arctic cooperation framework. How do you think things will be arranged going forward with now Europeans involved in the island and U.S. renewed interest?
Well, the other element to all of this, and we really shouldn't forget it. I mean, yes, it's very easy to focus on President Trump and to say, you know, he's a personal flashpoint. He's the one who's actually caused all the chaos and mayhem in the last 12 months. Go back 3 or 4 years, and this is important. It was actually the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation that created the first crisis in recent times in Arctic geopolitics. The Arctic Council, collaboration between Arctic states, was suspended and remains suspended. So we shouldn't forget that Putin's Russia has played a strong role in all of the current discombobulation. But I do think it is a remarkable situation to be in that European states and the United States are having this extraordinary dialogue with one another, and where something that we used to take for granted not so long ago appears to be no longer part of the taken for granted.
All right, definitely a lot of complexity surrounding this issue there, and thanks for helping us shed light on how everything ties together. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on DVB World.
Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to DVB World.